All right, welcome back to Remote Work Bay. I have a very, very special guest all the way from Sacramento with me here today. Stephanie, would you like to give a little story about yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Hey, Audrey. Thanks so much for having me on your program today. It's special to be here since we've known each other for so long and we've followed each other's, career paths for so long. I'm a TV broadcast journalist. I currently work in the Sacramento market. Previously, I covered, I'm still covering actually, all the wildfires, and now we're looking at coronavirus, business closures, the whole thing. So that's currently what I'm doing right now. Before broadcast journalism, I worked in tech for quite some time in-house, launching global marketing programs for different venture-backed companies. And then before that, I was also a journalist. So kind of pivoted back and forth a little bit, but broadcast journalism is what I'm doing now.
And what inspired you to dive into journalism and eventually become a broadcast journalist?
Yeah, so, how I got started was, I think it had a lot to do with, how I was raised growing up. My parents were very much about getting me involved in creative, artistic activities, a lot of performance-based activities like dance, or, my mom encouraged me to do a lot of creative writing. She'd take me to art classes. So I became this very expressive, creative, young thing as I was growing up. And I remember watching people like Connie Chung on television, just like the few Asian broadcasters, and thinking that's something I would really like to do. And I don't know if you remember this, Audrey, but you ever watch Reading Rainbow when we were kids?
Yes.
There was that segment when the kids would go on, LeVar Burton, he would say well, don't take my word for it, right? And then the kids with the books would show up on TV, and then they would talk about why they like these books. And I'd be watching these kids, and I'd be like, I can do that. How did they get to do that? And so, that kind of thinking just kind of followed me all throughout college. And, I did a bunch of internships and just really loved the nature of the work. And so I think that's kind of set the foundation for why I chose to kind of go into broadcasting, and, just my innate curiosity about all things and just wanting to kind of make a difference in the community through storytelling, I think is another key component of that.
So you hopped from journalism to tech and back to journalism. Why that shift? What made you want to go into tech and then go back into journalism?
Yeah, so at the time, I think it was 2014. I'd been in journalism for a couple of years at that point in New York City. And I just really missed being back home on the West Coast. That was one key thing. The other thing was I was very curious about the startup space, because that was kind of blowing up at the time. It was starting to kind of I was starting to hear echoes of it being on the East Coast, and then hearing about all this innovation coming out of Silicon Valley and startups and apps and mobile app development. And I also wanted, and I was like, okay, so I want to kind of get into this. I want to tell stories about this. But if I get into this, it has to be in a specific niche that I'm passionate about, which was gaming. And so, and you know how it is, Audrey, you just hustle, you find those opportunities. Yeah. And I was able to find an opportunity at this up and coming mobile games development shop called NG Moco. And so I ended up there as their first internal storyteller hire. And from that point on, did interviews with executives, put together creative assets, all that whole thing. They eventually put me in their marketing department, and I kind of climbed the ranks from there. And then I was in that industry for quite some time, and then I transitioned into, an investment or a venture capital firm, and then I dabbled into some startups myself. But I think there was always something in the back of my mind, this kind of, call it intuition, or this nagging feeling where I was like, there's something missing. I need to kind of see what it could be like if I were to pursue reporting full time and just do that and put my whole heart into it for, and just see what that's like. Because I don't want to live with any regrets, right? I really missed it. And, I can't really describe what that feeling it's like. It's just something there. And I just didn't want to live with any regrets. So I was like, okay, I've been able to become director of this venture capital marketing branch. I work with some great companies, gotten to know some great people. But I want to try something else that could result in more personal satisfaction for me. So that's why I ultimately chose to sacrifice a lot, moved, into a small town and started reporting there. And now I'm in Sacramento.
Right, right. And I mean, it's probably been so crazy this year as a reporter.
Yeah.
I mean, offline when we were talking, I mean, I've been following you on social media, and just some of the things that you've shared, the little bits and pieces that you shared that you're dealing with I can't even imagine being in your shoes. What do you think are your greatest challenges this year as a journalist? And even beyond that, as being an Asian female journalist in this industry, in this day and age?
Yeah, I think what to kind of address like some of the things you were mentioning earlier before your question, it's it is such a privilege to be a journalist, but also we do find ourselves in these dangerous situations, and partly it is because it's our role to be the eyes of on the behalf of viewers at home and on the behalf of the public, right? So I'm just trying to say, like, even though you yourself are not out there, like, I'm proud to be able to help be your eyes and ears out on the front lines of like a fire or a protest or whatever. So you therefore don't have to deal with all of that, right? But I certainly, but I certainly appreciate what you're saying too, like like, hey, just be safe and all of that. But to answer your other questions, like the challenging parts of being a journalist this year, I think 2020 has been challenging for all of us, right? It's challenging to be a human being this year. I think in terms of just key challenges with coronavirus, it does make our jobs it does add another layer of challenge to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I would say, like, for example, there's like some like logistical and operational changes, right? Like, so we don't work in the newsroom anymore, the field crews. So my photographer and I were always assigned to the same photographer, and we're generally always assigned to the same equipment, to the same live truck. And when we go out and we cover stories, we have to do things like be extra careful when we do interviews, right? So we have mic stands. So instead of like holding up a microphone and like just going up to you, we have like, we put the mic on a pole or something. And, that does take a little bit of extra time to set up. And sometimes when you're running and gunning it and you want to get that important interview, it's just like, come on, I would say like that's, one of the, just like one of the things, one of the challenges, one of the operational, kind of like logistical challenges. I think there are people, I think everyone, again, just going back to the point of it being a difficult year, people are upset, they're angry, understandably so. There's so many people who are jobless. They're still waiting for their unemployment checks to come in. There might be a small business owner. I saw you interviewed one recently. Just the constant pivoting and adapting and feeling like things are not in your control. You as a journalist, it's our job to sit down and listen to people's stories and try to deeply empathize with what they're going through, and to be able to convey what they're going through in the most essentially convey what they're going through to the public, right? And so when you yourself are taking in people's trauma and you're listening to all that, it's really important, I think, and I tell this to anyone, any journalist I speak with, anyone who's on the front lines of this sort of thing, healthcare workers, it's so important that we take care of our mental health, because, you are constantly exposed to that trauma. Same thing with with the protests we've been seeing, people out there talking about, like, they want justice, they want an end to systemic racism, things like that. People are traumatized by that. They're seeing people who look like them constantly getting killed by law enforcement, right? Yeah. And that constant reopening of wounds. So so it's so important for journalists like me, in order for us to do our jobs efficiently and to get that key information out, to share what people are going through to folks who are watching, that we also take care of our mental health as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think another big challenge right now is personal safety.
Mm.
I think the political environment has created it so that, over the last several years, there's been this building mistrust against the media. Even though, the media, press freedoms, it's part of the First Amendment, right? We provide a public service. It's our job to be objective and fair and get information to people and to question authority. There's somehow this perception that's been created that the media is the enemy, it's frustrating, but we work with it. But there are times, say, when we go to demonstrations, whether it's on the far left or the far right, or you just never know who's going to show up at these things. We have to have security with us sometimes. But even on stories when you don't expect it to be that extreme, I could be covering a restaurant, kind of maybe trying to change its menu, and then I'll be out on the sidewalk. Somebody might come up to me and my photographer and say something offensive, or they'll try to interrupt our live shot. So I think it's just being ever the more vigilant and resilient given the times, being ever the more resilient and self-aware of your surroundings at this time as a journalist. So I would say those are the key challenges right now, making sure we're taking care of mental health, making sure that we're keeping our personal safety on a pedestal.
Yeah.
and just the general logistical and operational changes given COVID.
Okay, so first of all, wow, with like the changes in how you're interviewing people, I think I did see like a behind the scenes photo that you took. Do you feel like by interviewing people from afar, it's affecting, the type of information or stories they're willing to tell you because you're so far away? It's like, is it just weird interviewing people from a 6-foot distance or 6+ foot distance with face masks on? You're not able to see a person's emotion or your emotions. Is it different as that?
That's a very, very interesting question, a good observation. For me, I think what I do is I always make it a point to be very expressive with other parts of my body that are available. You can't see my face, you can't see, if I'm smiling or anything like that, right? But then I try to use the tone of voice, right? If I know this is a story about, say, a coach who just lost his star player to a deadly car crash, and I have to go, you want to show sympathy, right, in your voice. You want to kind of go in with this tone of understanding and compassion. And then you can also use your eyes to communicate as well. So I think, but depending on the situation, it's always case by case. Some instances you might want to go in with a bit more confidence, right? Like, I'm the authority on this. I know what I'm talking about, especially during a live shot situation when you're addressing the audience. But there's different ways there's things you can do to work around the fact that people can't see your face all the time. But it does, it's just, adapting. It's not ideal. Like, I would like people to be able to not just see half of my face, but it's important because, it's a public safety thing.
Totally. I feel like, what would be more interesting if they created a face mask that it's a see-through one, that protects you. It's kind of like a face shield, but
they have those.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of weird for me because I don't see other reporters using that, and I don't see people wearing it normally on the street, and you still have to maintain this sense of like, this is what people are doing, and we kind of set the standard for what people are doing. And
right.
So, but I have seen that, and I have one of those the ones just like the plastic sheet that goes over the face and like glasses.
Yeah.
So I have one of those. I haven't used it yet, but it's just there for the day when things get a little bit more relaxed. Yeah. We don't have to have our faces covered up anymore.
You could be a trendsetter there.
Oh, maybe I should, Audrey. I'll do my live shot like that tomorrow.
Forgive me for not knowing this, but like how close can you get to a specific situation that you're reporting on, say like the fires or, say a protest? Like, how deep in it are you?
It depends. It really depends. Like, sometimes if it's like a wildfire, right? We want to get the best pictures of that scene.
Yeah.
So we get as close as possible. But because it's so unpredictable, once it gets dangerous, we just move out of there. And fortunately, I'm paired with a photographer, so we can be each other's eyes and ears. So when he's out there getting his B-roll, and it's calm, and at first so calm, and we're just getting some flames by the side of the road, and all of a sudden the wind picks up and all the ash starts blowing in and the smoke starts rolling in, and I'm seeing this, and he's still got his eye on the camera lens on the other side of the road. I'm like, hey, it's time to go. It's time to go. We got to leave now, and so it's like that. I mean, and it's the same with protests too. In the months we've been covering this, generally the plan is we just keep our distance, and we try to stay as far away as possible, but still being able to see them.
Yeah.
But it also depends too, if it's like a daytime protest and we know the organizers and the energy is such that it feels safe. We have our security with us, but we'll get closer, and we might even kind of go up to them and try to get some interviews as they're marching.
Yeah.
And we've done this several times initially when those marches were mostly during the daytime and they were getting started. Now it's as this thing drags on, we just don't know what to expect. So it's always important to be as careful as possible.
Careful, yeah. Please be careful as your friend.
Thank you.
I'm so worried
Appreciate
about
that. Yeah.
One of the first people I messaged when this whole quarantine happened, I'm like, while we're all sitting at home, you're out there. You're out there on the lines, like helping share these stories and pass on information to the rest of us that have no idea what's going on out there. So
thank you for that. That's very that's a very nice thing to say, and we really appreciate kind thoughts like that from folks like you. This is everyone's going through their own set of challenges right now. I would say for people in the news, it's we get it from all directions nowadays. It's hard to please anyone, and so whether people are on the left or on the right or whatever, we get it from all directions. It's online, it's just randomly on the street, it's in the protests. Sometimes I'm like, can I just go to the zoo and cover that giraffe story? But then somebody will get offended by that too. You know what I mean?
It's so hard. This day and age, it's hard. And I mean, to go off of that, how do you stay unbiased?
I think it's a fundamental part of our training, and it is so important that we stay objective at all times. There have been situations I think that we've all been in where it's like, man, I totally disagree with what that person is saying, but I am not allowed to put my personal opinion on it because it's not my place to do that. And it wouldn't serve the public well if we were to insert our own opinion into it, right? So what we do is we always present the facts objectively. You watch it and you make up your own mind about it, or maybe you decide to do more research on it. The unfortunate thing is because of how the political atmosphere is, everything has become so distorted in terms of how a lot of people see the media. So I get messages all the time, especially when I go out and cover, more controversial topics like protests. Like, oh, you're being biased. Like, Stephanie, why are you being such a Democrat? And all sorts of it's just so ridiculous when you're doing your best to be impartial and you're risking a lot being out there, and you get that kind of feedback. But I also think that's the nature of how things are right now. So.
And how is it like being an Asian female journalist, especially in COVID times?
It's interesting. I think when it first came around, I will be frank, I felt self-conscious about going out and wearing a face mask, even though I was one of the first people in my mind at my station, like, I really feel like I should be wearing a face mask. I don't feel comfortable going out and not wearing one. But like everyone else, I think was still like adjusting to that because culturally it's just not a thing in the US. Right? So, I definitely felt a bit self-conscious about that at the beginning. I'll tell you that. I am very fortunate where I work in a space where that, we support, I think, people of color. We support telling stories about what people of color are going through. Like I had a chance to work on a special about race in modern times, shortly after I started covering these demonstrations, where we literally just sat down with different community activists of color, and we asked them, we literally gave them the microphone and just let them talk. We didn't insert, reporter VO or anything like that. It was just, we just gave them the microphone, we let them talk. So I'm very fortunate to be in a space that welcomes those voices of diversity and wants to allow people, create that space for voices of diversity to be heard in a fair and objective way. It's not slanted, you know what I mean? Which is a very important distinction to make. I think being an Asian woman, a journalist of color, it gives me this opportunity to champion for those other minority voices who may not be heard. There are there's a rising number of hate crimes against Asian Americans and Asian people in general in the United States, given everything that's been going on. And it's been such a tragedy seeing the impact on, local families and local businesses. But because I am there in this newsroom, I see things from that perspective, I can offer those perspectives as story ideas in our afternoon pitches and have that opportunity to elevate those stories and bring those out into the broader public. If that makes sense? So it's just this opportunity as a journalist of color, because I empathize with these topics, to bring in that perspective and kind of diversify our coverage, you know what I mean? And in that way, when people watch, they're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that before, or I didn't know that Asian people experience racism, because the model minority myth, right? So that's what I would say about being an Asian American journalist. Yeah.
Have you experienced racism towards you on the field?
I would say personally, it hasn't, I can't say anything that's been super obvious to me, fortunately. I would say it's more of just being a woman, a female journalist. A lot of social media comments especially are directed at my appearance, or, just like inappropriate sort of things, messages. As simple as like, oh, can I take you out to dinner or ask you out to, or to like, it gets kind of goes downhill from there. So, so that's what I will say. It is, it's not so much about, my ethnicity. It's more about the fact that I'm a woman. But you never know what people are thinking. The ethnicity thing could always be playing in the back of people's minds. But you just try not you just try not to let that affect the work too much. It's not the point of the work. So
part of it now.
Yeah.
As a public figure, I was watching Michelle Obama's documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you had an opportunity or had the time to watch it yet. Yeah.
I think I watched it a month or two ago. I think it might be the same one you're talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's just following Michelle Obama and her going on tour. And she was saying something that just actually really resonated with what you just said, where, when she became, First Lady of the United States, people cared more about what she was wearing. Yeah. She was saying. How interesting is that?
It is, that's something that's been true of, almost like pretty much every First Lady. It always seems like, the value is the emphasis, or the eyes are more on the fashion and versus the actual platform. And I think that it's an unfortunate reality that we deal with. But I think the focus for myself personally, just being out there, is you hope you work hard and you hope that the work speaks for itself, because that's what matters at the end of the day. Obviously, I know that being out in the public, you have to look presentable, right? So you have to. It kind of ties in with the whole idea of carrying yourself with a sense of authority. If you look like a slob, like on TV, like people aren't not gonna take you seriously, right? So it's kind of, having a bit of a balance,
Mm-hmm.
there, and just knowing that in this ongoing kind of work
Mm-hmm.
for gender equality and all of that, like this is just a part of it, where we are going to be evaluated for our appearance, and sometimes that the work that we do might get a little bit diluted, but that's why we just keep on going.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right, right. I totally agreed. And I mean, you're doing a great job. So, I mean, I've watched quite a
Thanks.
few segments. I'm clearly a Stephanie Lin fan.
Oh, and I'm a fan of you too, always.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I'm trying over here. But,
yeah, you're
I
doing great.
thanks. Thank you. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, also where you think the entire industry is going, as a whole, from I
Mhm.
mean, from like a variety of different things, right? Like everything that's happened this year
Mhm.
with fake news,
Mhm.
with biased news. I mean, biased news has always been around, but it's like
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends that ask me, they're like, where should I get my information? Where do
Mhm.
I get the news? Like, where do I get my news these days? Like,
Mhm.
how can you commentate on that? Like, where do you have any advice for
Mhm.
the average person?
It is so important to know your sources.
Mhm.
I would not count on like Facebook for your information. Please don't do that. Please don't subscribe to online conspiracy theories.
Yep.
A lot of people do right now, and it's unfortunate. I think doing your research is really important. There have been different outlets that have done different studies on this sort of thing.
Mhm.
Obviously, Fox News has always been known to be the more conservative. They
Right.
do coverage that appeals specifically appeals specifically to their viewers' interests.
Mhm.
So I can't say that is a unbiased source of news. MSNBC is a little bit more liberal. They're kind of the liberal counterpart to Fox News.
Mhm.
And everything else in between, like NBC, ABC, CBS. Like, I'm not going to claim to be the expert on any of this, but I would like to think that they ride the middle of the road,
Mhm.
because it just kind of goes back. It's about being fair and objective,
Yeah.
and I don't, and it's our job to question authority just because somebody runs a package on the president, alleging, what was the big story in the headline? It's he's not paying his income tax, right?
Mhm.
Just because they're running a story about him not paying all his income tax doesn't mean that they're biased against the president, or
Right.
that they're a liberal media outlet,
Mhm.
right? It means that they're they're getting the truth out, and they've done their fact checking, and they're doing their jobs,
Right.
right?
Right.
So in terms of the future of the industry, I think a lot of it is actually going to go towards streaming.
Mhm.
I think that, I understand that a lot of young people are not, well, actually, that's actually an entirely separate issue. I think it is a problem that young people are not watching or digesting traditional TV news. But
Mhm.
I know that a lot of networks like NBC, ABC, I think CBS also, that they're starting their own 24-hour streaming services,
Okay.
to kind of complement all the other streaming services that are going on, like with what Disney is doing, with what Netflix is doing.
Mhm.
And we'll just kind of see where things are going from there. I know that the networks are also experimenting with TikTok, and they're also on Snapchat, and they're also on Instagram. So they're trying to hit a lot of the younger demographic who
Oh.
don't digest news in a conventional way. I actually would love to know where young millennials are getting their news from, because I worry about them. Like, I worry that they're not staying informed, or that they don't know what's going on in the world. Like, is all they do, like, just stay on their phone and do TikToks all day, like make TikToks all day?
It could be. I mean, so many young people consume like so much media off social media that
Mhm.
it's, like you said, it's, you just don't know how their algorithms work and what type of information that
Mhm.
these sites are pushing towards people.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I just watched another great documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I
Oh my,
heard about that one. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet.
watch it. Definitely watch it. And it's talking about the same exact issue.
Mhm.
It's their algorithms are to keep young people on their platforms, but it's biased towards what they like and what
Mhm.
So it's you're going, if you're super liberal, you're going to probably see a bunch of very liberal articles and news on your social site.
Exactly. And then you think that's the reality.
Right.
You're living in your own echo chamber, and then you go out and then you meet some people who might be like mildly conservative, and then you just like, oh my God, what's wrong with them? It's like, well, no, there's people, all ideologies who exist in this world. Like, calm down.
Exactly. But it's highly curated, right? I mean, I've seen, being on social media, I have seen many of my friends in this last year write posts that say, well, if you're not an X supporter or that supporter, or if you're not saying anything about, the current protests, I'm going to delete you, right? I mean, at that point, you are personally curating the type of things that you see online when you're doing that.
Yeah, that's true.
It's pretty divided out there. I'll say it's just overall.
It's extremely divided, and it is heartbreaking that it is so divided.
Right.
I really hope that we can heal as a people, because there's far too much rage and madness and hurt going on right now, and something needs to shift fundamentally. I really think so, because it's overwhelming. It can get to be too much. So
do you fear what's coming up in November, considering you are going to be covering the elections? And I have a theory. I mean, my theory, talking to a lot of people out there, is that either way, there's going to be some pretty hardcore riots and protests in November.
Yeah. I mean, the president himself said that, and he could be just saying this because he's a former reality TV star, but he said that he's not going to concede peacefully if he were to lose the election.
Yes.
And that's historic. We've never heard that before. Usually,
definitely.
Yeah, usually the person who loses is like, all right, I will be a gentleman, or in the future, hopefully it's a, a gentle woman, and, concede. But I think I myself, I can't say I'm concerned necessarily. It's more that I think it's more important than ever that people inform themselves of the issues at hand, inform themselves of what's on the ballot and what's at risk, and just get out and make their voices heard on November 3rd,
Right.
And we'll be there as journalists to cover it all. And we'll see what happens, so.
Well, please stay safe.
Yes, thank you.
I worry very much about people like you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's very that's very supportive. I appreciate that. And I it's like you and my mother and every other person, close person in my life. We do everything we can to stay as safe as possible. Sometimes, of course, things happen and you don't expect them to happen. But yeah, definitely have that in the back of our minds always.
Absolutely. And a personal question, where do you see yourself? Do you want to stay in journalism for the long run? Do you see yourself going back into tech and maybe starting up something new? I mean, where do you see yourself in, the immediate future and maybe down the line?
Yeah, I think right now I am committed to doing what I'm doing. Over the last several years, I've kind of developed this or picked up this perspective that nothing in life is permanent. Pain, suffering, happiness. So, and the same goes with career, so I think in this chapter of my life that I'm writing, I'm happily committed to being a strong journalist and serving the public in that way. Who knows what's going to happen in 10, 20 years? We just don't know. We can't predict that, right? What what the universe is gonna give to us. But this is what I'm doing now. It's truly historic times. I sometimes wonder why this would all be happening, why the universe would be presenting, these tremendous challenges to all of us. And I just happen to be a news reporter at this point in time. Like, it's almost kind of like a test. Like, can you really handle this, right? But I think there's a reason there. And I think when we look back on this in 5 or 10 years, it'll all make sense. But the short answer to your question is I'm doing this for now.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get through this year as a reporter, I feel like you could get through any year.
I think if all of it, I think that applies to all of us
That's true.
as
That's
human beings.
very true.
If we can survive this, I don't think we can complain about anything else. You know.
That's so
So.
true. Wow. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add, or is there anything else, like any other information or advice that you would give to people?
Oh gosh, I think I just really want to reemphasize the importance of like self-care during this time. It is a very difficult year. Everyone is going through something. Everybody is experiencing or being exposed to some kind of pain or stress. It's very important, I think, to practice that self-awareness. Try not to project any, anger or onto other people. Just try to be kind and compassionate when you can. I know it's hard, yeah, take care of yourself, however shape or form that might look like for you. And also just stay informed if you can. We're heading into a big election season, right? This is huge. This is historic. However you choose to vote, just make sure that there's information and context that goes behind your decision when you mail in your ballot or when you go to the polls. So yeah, that's what I would close with.
Well, awesome. And how do people find you?
How do people find me?
I mean,
sometimes I want to stay hidden.
TV, outside of the TV, how can people connect with you?
Oh, sure. So if people just have any questions about how journalists work, maybe they're a young journalist and they want to get some advice. Yeah. They live in Sacramento. They want to follow my coverage. They can find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I believe I use the same handle. It's at Stephanie Lin TV. Okay. And I'm generally pretty responsive, unless you ask me a perverted question. And will not go out to dinner with you.
Do you hear that, boys or girls?
I'm sorry?
I'm like, you hear that, boys and girls?
Yeah.
Don't ask Steph. Too busy right now.
Yeah, seriously. Like, yeah. Anyways, you know what I mean. It just has to be like a normal question.
I do. Well, awesome. So I'll put all of that information below as well.
Okay.
This video out so people can come find you and follow you and all the amazing things that you're doing. And and thank you so much for everything that you do on the front lines and for being a part of Remote Work Bay. I really do hope that things start getting a little better and safer. But I would love to see you in person at some point.
Likewise, Audrey, and we're gonna make this work out. We're gonna figure out a time to sync up in person, and and all this madness will be over hopefully sooner than later.
I know. Well, thank you so much. Stay safe.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, and you as well.
All right. Bye.